congratulations on winning the Flute New Music Consortium.
Thank you.
Flute Duos composition competition. And it's really nice to see you again.
Wonderful to see you too.
We met a couple years ago and you came to our recital, we played your piece.
You commissioned this version of the piece actually, so.
It was a great piece and it was really nice to work with you. We really enjoyed playing that piece.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions. First of all, tell us about yourself and your musical background and what are your current activities?
Sure. So I grew up in Florida and I started playing piano when I was 5 years old, and then picked up violin when I was about 11 and started composing in high school. I tried composing before that, didn't really stick, but when I was in high school I started composing, and I loved it so much. I could have gone into college as a piano performance major, but I started composing and that's what I wanted to do. So I went to University of Southern California to study composition.
That's awesome. We are glad you chose this path. What was your inspirations behind the Reinventions, your flute and saxophone work, and your compositional process?
Yeah, so this piece in particular was a little different than my normal compositional process. Usually I have some kind of extra musical topic that, like an image or an event or a story or something that I then write the music about. But in this case, I was a fellow in composition at the Boon International Music Festival a few summers ago, 2016. And the theme of the summer was reinvention, and spelled with the re in parentheses. And the Ying brothers' idea behind that theme was that as musicians, we're constantly reinventing ourselves. We are constantly repurposing materials that we already know to make them new and to make them fresh. So I liked that idea, and I began writing the piece while I was at this festival, and using the idea of the Baroque invention, but through a 21st century perspective. So the three movements are each modern inventions, where the invention is a form that's typically a contrapuntal form with the two voices are imitating each other a lot. And Bach's inventions, for example, are mostly canonic, and usually the two voices imitate each other at about half a measure or a whole measure. But I decided to throw a few wrenches into that. So the first movement I made into an invention that started out at a canon at the eighth note. And so very rapidly, both instruments are taking turns playing material, basically hocketing back and forth. But also not just imitating each other with the same pitch, but one instrument is flipped upside down from the other instrument. So one is inverted from the other, and so when one goes up, the other one goes down. And it stays consistent to this throughout the whole first invention. The second one was much more freely composed. It's a slow and more lyrical invention, but then it takes a different turn. In the middle section, it becomes sort of aleatoric, where I use some box notation. And one instrument continues playing these gestures as in an improvisatory sort of way, while the other one is playing this sort of long line, this melodic line that just keeps on flowing, and then they pass it back and forth and a number of times until that passing back and forth actually speeds up to the high point of the movement. And the third movement, again, is constructed as a canon, but this time the canon gets smaller and smaller as the movement goes on. It starts out at a measure between the two parts, and then gradually gets slower or gets closer by an eighth note and then another eighth note, until at the very end, two instruments are only one beat apart.
That's great. I played it in 2016 when I was at Central Michigan University with my centerline duo for flute and saxophone. And we contacted you, and we were so glad we got this piece from you. We were like, it was challenging, it was hard, but we really enjoyed it. So I hope more people will perform this piece, Reinventions. Who has most inspires you as a composer?
It's interesting that this is the piece we're talking about because it really has been J.S. Bach that's been my biggest influence. I think looking at his music is just amazing how he's able to balance the intellectual construction of his music. It's so amazingly, it's like a puzzle that fits together perfectly, but at the same time, it creates such a clear and strong emotional response. And so I feel like his genius is just be able to bring those two things together and meld them so perfectly, and just have no limit to what he was able to achieve through music that way.
And it's great that you took this as a base of your composing style, but also you develop like such a high quality of this work.
Well, thank you.
And well, you mentioned before, but how did you begin composing? I think you said in high school.
Started in high school, yeah, but more specifically, I'd originally tried composing when I was, I think, 6 or 7 or something, early on when I was playing piano. And I was writing everything by hand, pencil and paper, and, you know, as a 7-year-old kid, I didn't really want to make straight lines, and so it was a pain to have to use a ruler, and I didn't really know what I was doing at all then. And I mean, part of me still doesn't completely know what I'm doing now, but when I was in high school, I discovered notation software. And a few of my friends and I discovered this program called Noteworthy Composer that was very basic. It was Windows only, but you could put in notes and it would play them back, and it would try to simulate the instruments using general MIDI. And I really had a lot of fun playing around with this. And late at night, when we should have been studying for tests and writing papers, we were writing bits of music and sending it back and forth. One of my friends who was in orchestra with me, bassist, sent me some ideas that he had written, and I liked them and started expanding on those ideas. And these were for string orchestra. And a couple months later, I had come up with my friend this 10-minute string orchestra piece. And it was fascinating to kind of just like take these ideas and then construct a whole piece of music out of them, and not just what can you really do with melody and with harmony. And so I showed it to my orchestra director, and he was able to help me make it a little bit more reasonable in length, and then he programmed it. And so I got to hear my first composition, this joint project with my friend, live, and I wasn't in the orchestra that played it, so I got to sit in the audience and just take it in. And I realized the power of composition, that it was so amazing to be able to say anything I wanted to through music, and be able to tell the audience just whatever I wanted. So from that day on, I knew I wanted to be a composer. And I haven't done only a couple other collaborative pieces. It's kind of strange for composers to work together on the same project. But I figured out how I could write my own music, and then wanted to keep on composing forever. And so now I've got at least 80 or 90 compositions. I've lost track because I've got a whole lot of old ones that I don't really consider as part of my catalog anymore. But I actually went to University of Southern California thinking that I might want to go into the film scoring route, and because my music wanted to describe things, and I wanted to see how music could do that. And so I went to USC out in LA, perfect place to study film scoring. And then I saw that wasn't exactly the right fit for me either. I just wanted to keep on writing music for myself and not necessarily for a director. So, and that, I also love writing large ensemble music, chamber music, solo music, choir music. It's just, I've done about everything except opera to this point, and just keep on writing more and more. And right now, current projects, I just actually finished a piece today that I've been working on, a song cycle for a chamber group called F+. And soprano Lisa Perry, who I worked with starting last summer to write this piece, a couple settings of some of Gertrude Stein's poetry. And I just finished oboe concerto for oboe and wind ensemble that was commissioned from 15 college wind ensembles around the country, led by University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and John Clymer there. And then the next project after this is a percussion ensemble piece that I'm writing for Illinois State University, where I teach.
So are you planning to compose opera for the future?
Maybe one day. I don't know. I feel like I don't know what to do with that as much as I know what to do with instruments and or even with voice by itself or something. So it's a huge undertaking. Maybe one day,
Uh-huh.
not quite yet.
You quite have some compositions we need to explore.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like and what do you find challenging about writing for, especially for flute?
Yeah, flute is such a great instrument, and I think that's what the challenge is, that it's such an agile and such a virtuosic and such an expressive instrument. And because I don't play flute, I have to sort of go at it from the outside and um, study a lot of flute music and figure out like what the challenge is for me is to write as idiomatically as possible so that you have the most ability to get the most out of your instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to take advantage of the things the flute does so well, which is basically everything. And just like being able to use virtuosity in the right way, being able to use expressiveness and also extended techniques, being able to explore those in an appropriate way that doesn't either hinder the music or the performer in the same kind of way. So I think just because the instrument can do so much and because I'm coming from outside, it's a challenge to try to put myself in a flutist's shoes and just imagine that I'm a flutist. You know, how do I think like a flutist? And then what can I write so that it comes out the best possible way?
And what are the other pieces you wrote for flutes?
I've got a couple of recent ones. There's one that I wrote for Hannah Weiss.
Mm-hmm.
She was at University of Michigan where I knew her. And she commissioned me to write a solo piece unaccompanied. And I wrote a piece called Summer Triangle for her. And that's been played a few times. It's like a 15-minute long 3-movement piece that's based on the constellation. There are 3 constellations that are up at night in the summer. But the piece is actually about the mythology behind each of these constellations. There's the eagle, which was apparently carried Zeus's thunderbolts down to Earth. There was the swan, which I based it on the Aesop's fable about the swan that was almost killed for dinner, but then, you know, the person thinking that it was a goose, but then it cried out, and the person realized, oh, shouldn't kill this one. And then let's see, the Altair, Deneb, and then the lyre. Altair is the star in Orpheus's lyre, and so that movement is about Orpheus and his ill-fated trip to the underworld to try to bring his lost love back. And there's another piece that's more recent that was actually originally written for clarinet and electronics, but I made a version for alto flute and electronics called A Boon Fantasy, which is based on a Taiwanese Aboriginal musical tradition that I found really fascinating when I first heard it. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but the Pasabutbut is this group singing ritual where everyone is very, very slowly rising in pitch, and people are coming in and out, and so you get this very long, sustained sound that is almost imperceptibly rising in pitch over a course of many, many minutes. And the electronic part is based on that, and the flute part is essentially an improvisation that goes along with it. So if you can imagine all the microtones in between every pitch is being covered by the electronics, and so things go in and out of focus as the flute is playing not a single microtone itself, but changing its key as it's gradually moving up and up step by step.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm really curious about all of those pieces, and I'm sure all the other flute players, they will be really excited to explore your composition. And thank you so much for interviewing for the Flute New Music Consortium.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor. It's been an honor to be chosen as the winner of this, and I hope to work with a lot more flutists in the future.
We would love to work with you too. Thank you so much. Thank you.